Today we're going to start off talking about knives, probably the most essential tool in the kitchen, as it becomes difficult to combine flavors if you just have to eat them all separately with your teeth. Anyway, I used to keep all my knives on a magnetic block like this. There's mounted to the wall, which is very easy and handy to get to. But these days, since I'm usually mobile, I've gone with a knife roll. Very useful tool to keep all your knives in one place, keep them clean, keep them from getting rusty. Because of course you want to use knives that are not stainless steel. Stainless steel knives, while great for putting in the dishwasher, actually are really horrible to use as knives because they don't hold their edge that well, and when they do lose their edge, they're very difficult to sharpen because the steel is so hard. So I recommend going with either a high quality non-stainless steel or high carbon steel, which is much easier to sharpen, and always sharpen your knife before every use. That's just a really good habit to get into. I've got my set of knives here, and I've also got a set of knives that are just whatever happened to be hanging around the house where I'm house sitting. So, start off, we'll go with, let's start off with a single knife, and you really only need one knife, which is the classic chef's knife. This is a Calphalon Katana Series 8-inch chef, and I particularly like these knives for two reasons. Well, actually, a little more than that. Number one, they have a very high quality steel, which is VG1. It says Japanese steel, so I assume that means it was made, it was refined in Japan as opposed to actually mined there. And it was fabricated in China, of course, in very small letters. I like these knives because they have an excellent handle. You see the ergonomic handle there, epoxy, black epoxy handle. And they have a full tang that extends the full length of the handle, which means that this knife cannot easily lose its handle due to misuse or accidents. Now, something that you will often see as a counterpoint to this is, say, this, which has Chicago cutlery style. This is the 8-inch. I also have the 12-inch here, which is the first knife I ever bought on my own. And this is quality because it has fairly high quality steel, even though it is stainless. It has the full tang, it's well riveted. You won't usually see these knives fail. And at the end of the blade, there's no pommel, or I don't know, lip, as you see right here. See how this is a lip? That makes it very difficult to sharpen to the end of the blade, and I find it really impedes the use of the blade. This is a Sabatier, made in France, high carbon stainless. So you want high carbon, you don't want stainless. And I would personally avoid this unless you're very clumsy and you're afraid of getting yourself hurt. Now, there are a variety of different knife shapes you can use. This is really the only one you need because once you get used to a chef's knife, you can do just about anything with it. The only time I ever use something different is if I'm doing something that really more wants a cleaver, if I'm doing some sort of, say, carving a turkey or something like that, I might use a slightly smaller blade. Well, let's just leave that out there so we can look at that. So these are basically the same breed, old school Chicago cutlery back when they were still made in America. Another time that's not always best to use a chef's knife is cutting bread, which if you have, here's the 9-inch bread knife of the Katana series. The advantage of having the serrated bread is it doesn't give you a really clean, sharp cut to the bread. it allows the bread to pull apart more, and it gives you a much nicer texture than just cutting it with a super sharp chef's knife. Another classic shape for the kitchen is the santoku, very typical Japanese knife for cooking vegetables, or cutting vegetables, slicing. Not quite a sushi knife. A sushi knife has usually a single-edge bevel to it, and it's a very specific technique for using, but it's hard to use a sushi knife for much else than sushi. So this is good for a really wide variety of things, and it's usually my go-to knife when I'm not using the chef's knife. Here is the basically the Japanese version of the cleaver. This is the 7-inch nikeri, and I find that really nice if you've got, it's got a little bit of a rocker to it, not quite as much as the chef's, but it can be good for other things, certain things as well. It's kind of nice to have, but you don't really need it kind of knife. And sort of the same thing goes true for this, which is their 7-inch slicer. The advantage of a knife like this is it's much easier to do really like thin slices of onions with something like this, especially because it has these grooves hollowed out on either side of the knife, just like the santoku does. So that's a good feature to look for in a knife also. And the paring, which I really only use if I'm doing something like pitting cherries for a cherry pie, and it is useful for some things, but mostly I find it's just easier for me to use a larger knife. Not everybody feels that way. Some people like to use smaller implements when they can, and it is easier on your wrist for sure to have a lighter knife, and you can do a lot more detailed work with this easily. But a chef's knife, you can actually do a lot of detail work with this edge too. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I like having this point here as opposed to this design, where it's not quite as easily used, because you can actually get into like little small areas just using that point as well as using this point. Always be careful with your points too. You never want to really stab anything, or just be kind of careful with it, because if you do stab something, you can wind up with something like this, where they've broken the end of their knife, and you want to avoid that at all costs, because that really just kind of ruins the knife. Now there are some other kind of options for a knife. Like this is actually a reasonably good option for carving meats, the classic carving knife shape. This is a old USA stainless Geneva Forge USA. Looks like a really old knife. This is one you'll see on late night TV a lot. My dad used to love these things. He probably still does, but this is the classic Ginsu knife, or quick cut. These are mostly useful, I think, for using either slicing tomatoes or slicing bread. Honestly, it's good for tomatoes because it actually has a very flexible blade. That's an advantage of it. But overall, I find if you just keep your regular knife sharp, that's just as good, if not better. Another thing I would suggest avoiding is anything that has paint on the blade, like these, because as you'll see, the paint starts to wear off and that winds up in your food. So, best avoided. There's another one. So you can see the paint is really just worn off totally around the edges, and you don't want to be eating that paint. At least with steel, it's a material that the body can process well and actually kind of needs in some cases. I think that about covers it for most kinds. You also always want to have a pair of shears around, classic poultry shears. Not really necessary for poultry. I've known a lot of people who can completely debone a bird without any tools at all, just with their hands. And I've never been enough of a meat eater to really get good at that, but give it a shot. I think it's worth it. So I think that about covers it for this round. We are going to go to the next video now, where we will talk about sharpening your knife. I'm Valentine. May you be well. May you eat well, and be blessed. May all beings be at peace. May all beings be filled with unconditional love for all beings. Thank you. See you in the next video.